Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at the best healers for patch 10.17. Now keep in mind this is probably going to be my last video towards this patch because there's so many news happening for 10.2, so let's go out with a bang. A mandatory disclaimer before I do any of these videos: I probably will change the way I rank some of these healers. Maybe I'll rank healers based on their performance for weekly keys and these plus 20 keys, because that affects a majority of the population rather than looking at those 26, 27, 28 keys. And I've been really looking forward to this video because I've been playing every single healer in that kind of key range. I decided to maintain and level all of these healers, gear them up, and see how they deal in this poke environment. So we'll look at Mythic Plus, we'll look at my Mythic Plus ranking, and then we'll look at Raid. And in Raid I will mainly look at HPS because again the Raid is coming to an end. And if you like this video, like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. And let's go get started with Mythic Plus. And what you see right now on the screen, this is Subcreation, this is real player information. It generates a tier list based on, again, key ranges from 18 to 32. It's more about popularity of the spec rather than what the spec is capable of doing. For example, Mistweaver Monk can definitely do a lot better than what it's represented here, but this is where the meta was kind of heading in terms of really high keys, in terms of Holy Paladin. Again, in patch 10.15, big reworks, Paladin received multiple nerfs. All of the other healers were complaining about Holy Paladin because it was just made for Mythic Plus, or it felt like it was made for Mythic Plus with the amount of spot healing that it was providing, and I don't disagree with that. I think Holy Paladin is made for that 5-man dungeon content because of the amount of spot healing it's required in Season 2. Or what would my tier list look like in terms of weekly keys? So give or take plus 20 keys, which is honestly what majority of the population is striving to get to. There is a big discrepancy between rank 1 players in terms of the amount of players that are pushing rank 1s and the rest of the population. So I've been testing every single healer in those poke situations, and this is my ranking. I'm going to start off with S tier, and no one's going to be surprised with this. Holy Paladin S. I think, again, Holy Paladin, ever since the rework in patch 10.15, it's just made for Mythic Plus. It's been nerfed multiple times in terms of pure HPS, in terms of damage, but again, it basically has everything. It has continuous AoE healing. Again, you can use Hand of Divinity with Tears of Deliverance to extend your Tears of Deliverance. You can use your burst healing capabilities in terms of Divine Toll. You can spread your glimmers for DPS or healing, and or if you want to reset them, you can use Daybreak. It has a lot of spot healing capabilities. It has an immunity, it has a battle res, and a lot of people tend to forget about this, but Holy Paladin is honestly extremely durable. It can really withstand a lot of damage and you feel very, very secure. And even though you're a melee healer, you're not really that dependent, or for example, if you have to step out of the melee range for a couple of seconds, you're not really punished all that much. Again, you can use or can't use things like Crusader Strike, or your melee interrupt requires you to be in melee. But when you compare it to something like Mistweaver or Monk, who, for example, might be running Fist Weaving build, if you can't be in melee and hit your mobs, a lot of your healing is going to suffer. So Holy Paladin, honestly, it's just made for Mythic Plus. It has almost a button for every single situation. It has good utility. It has good survivability. It will give you the best chance of success whether you're doing that weekly key or pushing highest keys in the world. Now, in terms of other healers, I'm going to be placing Restoration Shaman in the A tier because I honestly feel if you're doing that poke environment, just having a really solid interrupt the Resto Shaman has, and the ability to AoE stun or knock back mobs or just disrupt mobs, is insanely powerful in carrying your groups. In terms of different gameplay, Resto Shaman has multiple different ways of achieving good numbers in terms of HPS, because you do have that Chain Heal build. Chain Heal went through a roller coaster of emotions in terms of becoming or being buffed, in terms of Tidebringer, in terms of other talents. Again, the tier set already went through multiple changes in terms of being somewhat undesirable, then you got buffed multiple times, and then it kind of allocated or allowed for this other build to emerge in terms of Primal Tide Core, Ancestral Awakening, and that Primordial Wave build, which is something what a lot of Resto Shamans are running in really high keys, especially if they have mana issues. But you don't need to worry about that in that weekly 20 key range. Chain Heal build is more than good enough to achieve good numbers. It is relatively easy to play in terms of you see people taking damage, you're going to press your Chain Heal, it's going to go into your Cloudburst, you can align it with your High Tide and your Tidebringer procs as well to make your Chain Heal feel a lot more juicier. And again, I talked about the utility. Having interrupt or a good interrupt is such a big game changer when it comes to carrying those meticulous pugs, especially if people are not sure about which mobs needs to be interrupted, because you can solo a lot of dangerous mobs in terms of interrupts and you don't have to rely on others. And again, I think Resto Shaman is just a great weekly healer. It is relatively easy to play. It has a high skill ceiling depending if you want to change your gameplay, and the utility is really good. Plus you have that heroism bloodlust if your group needs it. And the next healer is going to be, and this is going to be somewhat of a surprise, because in 10.17 this healer received probably some of the biggest changes when it comes to meticulous environment, and that is going to be Resto Druid. Now, I tested out Resto Druid before patch 10.17, before Grove Guardians were introduced, because in my opinion Resto Druid was really not that fun, or how do I say, you had to anticipate damage patterns in Mythic Plus. A lot of the times if you're doing pug environment, people are going to be taking, again, unnecessary damage. There's a lot of spike healing required, and in order to provide that spot healing capabilities of Resto Druid, then you would have to pre-hot. And if you decided to go into a kitty form and apply damage and things like that, if someone takes damage, you are being instantly punished by going into that kitty form, because you need to step out, start healing the person, and it just felt or created this feedback loop of gameplay that wasn't really that interesting, at least for me, because all you could do was apply Moonfire, Sunfire, and then just be a heal bot, which didn't feel like, again, I'm an enjoyer of different forms, enjoyer of kitty form in terms of providing damage, so I was not really that happy about Resto Druid performance before 10.17, but with the new introduction of Grove Guardians, I'm not gonna say it's a game changer, because if you're expecting to pick up Resto Druid and have the same spot healing capabilities like a Holy Paladin, you're going to be disappointed. What Grove Guardians does or achieves for Resto Druid is that, for example, if you're going to kitty form and someone is taking damage but they're not in immediate danger of dying, you're like, okay, I can use my Grove Guardians while in different forms. My Grove Guardians is going to provide some spot healing, is going to provide some AoE healing, and you can, for example, if you know the damage patterns, you can keep and stay in that form and provide additional damage. And this has accounted for an insane amount of overall healing. Based on my testing so far and some of those weekly type of keys, Resto Druid, Grove Guardians, in terms of all the synergies, was around 30% of my overall healing. You have 3 charges of Grove Guardians. They last for 15 seconds and the recharge rate is 20 seconds. So for example, if you're approaching a trash pack and there's going to be a huge amount of burst damage, or you need to really heal the party, you can activate all of them at the same time, because you might feel you're going to struggle with the healing, or you might save a charge or two for the next trash pack because you know that's going to provide or require more healing, and you can, for example, anticipate damage happening and pre-hot your targets, apply life blooms and things like that, because your Grove Guardian healing is going to be increased based on your mastery stacks, but they're not going to provide additional mastery stacks themselves. So overall, a big shift in terms of how Resto Druid handles different healing patterns or different damage patterns. Is it going to be something that a lot of other healers are going to flock to Resto Druid? Most likely not. Most of the people are already playing Holy Paladin, those high keys or weekly keys. The Resto Druid changes are not big enough for other healers to swap to Resto Druid, but the original or the players that are already playing Resto Druid, I think they're going to be very happy with the changes for Mythic Plus. The changes of Grove Guardian in raids are not as impactful as they are in Mythic Plus based on my overall healing contributions that I've been testing, but I'm going to be placing Preservation Evoker here, and I still think it is, again, in terms of damage profiles, it is very easy to play your Preservation Evoker in terms of providing a decent amount of DPS, which a lot of people like. They like the simplicity. They don't want healers, or if they want to provide damage as healers, they don't want to have another rotation that they need to learn. If you want to provide max DPS rotation as Resto Druid, you can really kind of make a class guide just purely on Resto Druid DPS or min-maxing Resto Druid DPS. Preservation Evoker damage profile is very easy. It's not that complicated. In terms of healing, in terms of spot healing and AoE, Spirit Bloom feels extremely powerful because of the tier set bonuses and things like that. Maybe your continuous spot healing capabilities are not all that interesting in terms of, I don't really want to use, for example, if all my cooldowns are on cooldown, I don't really want to use Living Flame in terms of spot healing. Again, it's not overly exciting, but I still think the biggest drawbacks is depending on your group composition. If you have a full melee comp, you feel like a pretty much god because your Dream Breath is easy to use and things like that. You can provide a lot of healing, and your healing can be pretty strong depending on which build you're running, because there is a DPS and a healing build for Preservation Evoker. But I recently ran a weekly key in terms of having 3 range DPS classes, and then I just realized, oh yeah, the range limitations, trying to get everyone in Dream Breath can be really awkward. And this is why I think that in certain keys or certain pug environments where you don't have a lot of stacking, Preservation Evoker can still suffer from that range limitation in terms of 30 yards for a lot of your heals, and in terms of, again, how do I hit everyone with Dream Breath, because it can account for a lot of your overall healing at the end of the dungeon. So I still think you can have a very good time with Preservation Evoker, but the biggest problem with Preservation Evoker when it comes to really high keys is the fact that you're not playing Augmentation, and that is something that Preservation Evoker cannot really control. And the same kind of thing actually applies to Devastation. The fact that Evoker or Augmentation Evoker is pretty much mandatory for the highest keys in the world means that 9 times out of 10, if you're looking to get rank 1 title and you're looking to pug and you apply to a group as an Evoker, they'll ask you, are you Augmentation? Which is something, this is more based on the overall balance of the game or the balance of the support class, because it is pretty much mandatory, and that's why Preservation Evoker has fallen in the highest keys in the world. But who cares? We're just looking at that weekly key right now, and you can have a good time as Preservation. And in terms of next healer in this list, honestly, I could have shuffled a lot of the healers in terms of A tier, but I'm going to be placing Mistweaver here. And again, surprise, surprise, A tier. I don't think the balance of healers is that bad when it comes to that weekly content, with the exception of Holy Paladin. I said that multiple times. So Mistweaver Monk is one of those healers that received some substantial changes in 10.17 in terms of Mana Tea being completely reworked. And the best thing about Mana Tea is, think of it as a way to guarantee a proc of your foresight bonus. Mana Tea has an internal cooldown of 10 seconds in terms of proccing your foresight bonus, but you can pretty much say like, hey, I have Mana Tea stacks, I don't have that internal 10-second cooldown, or I haven't used Mana Tea in the last 10 seconds. I'm going to use my Mana Tea, just channel a couple of stacks, and I'm going to get that foresight bonus, and I can provide additional more healing, which honestly I think played out better in raid environments where you can use it during your Yuan build, but we'll talk about that in the raiding section. So technically speaking, your foresight uptime is probably going to be a little bit higher based on whether you're going to run that new or changed up life cycles talent. And in terms of my testing, in terms of testing those weekly keys, I have a really fun time. For example, the content that you see or the video that you see right now, this is my Mistweaver Monk with like 420 whatever item level. In terms of Monk and Mythic Plus, I definitely feel it's one of the most underdog healers right now, because I actually think the HPS throughput of Mistweaver is actually really good, and I think you can make it work in almost all cases in terms of Mythic Plus. I actually think Mistweaver goes from being one of the easiest healers to being one of the hardest, because, for example, if you're approaching a large trash pack and you're running that Fist Weaving Feline Stomp build, you can Feline Stomp and Spinning Crane Kick, and if it's a large trash pack, you're providing a huge amount of passive healing with DPS on top of it, and the rotation is very simplistic, and you're doing good numbers in terms of healing and HPS. But once you cannot be in that melee range, and that's probably the biggest annoyances when it comes to Mistweaver Monk. You are a true melee healer if you're running that Fist Weaving build. If you cannot hit mobs, your healing is going to plummet, and then you might have to do a lot of spot healing with Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, Vivify type of playstyle, which is going to drain your mana and feel really, it almost feels painful to play. So this is why I think Mistweaver Monk should definitely, or in my eyes, in order to make it an almost perfect healer when it comes to Mythic Plus, they should increase the range of your melee abilities so it doesn't feel that painful if you have to step out a little bit. Again, there's many moments in Mythic Plus where you might run out of area, or you have to go somewhere else, or you have to dodge an ability and you can't hit the boss, and you just feel it's almost like a panic. But overall, I actually think Mistweaver Monk can achieve really good numbers. The problem with Mistweaver is that no one plays monks in general, and therefore the representation of monks or Mistweavers is very low. And on top of that, monks are lacking that really strong utility in terms of battle res or bloodlust or priest utility. For example, priests don't have an interrupt, they don't have a bloodlust, they don't have a battle res, but they have mass dispel, they have PI, and they have mind suit. So Monk is lacking that big utility item to really catapult them higher in that Mythic Plus meta when it comes to the highest keys in the world. But in terms of weekly keys, honestly, Mistweaver Monk, when you're doing those large trash back pulls and you're doing that spin to win, Feline Stomp, Spinning Crane Kick, it honestly feels really fun to see the numbers go up. And it's one of the most fun healers for me in terms of getting those weekly keys done. I just wish the range or melee range would be increased by a little bit. And the next healer on this list is going to be Holy Priest. Honestly, I could have placed Holy Priest a lot higher in these weekly keys, because honestly, you can have a really good time with Holy Priest in terms of providing spot healing capabilities, in terms of dealing with a lot of unexpected damage that happens in Mythic Plus, because it is a classic type of healer. You see people take damage, you heal them. And again, a lot of new players are going to resonate with this type of healing, because, for example, you could be running that Lightweaver's build in terms of flash heal and heal, and that is a very, very simplistic type of gameplay. You can also choose to run that Miracle Worker build, which is going to give you additional charges of Serenity Sanctify, which is going to allow you to use more of those Holy Word spells, which again feeds into that AoE and single target type of healing capabilities. On top of that, a lot of your passive healing is coming from Prayer of Mending, which again is due to your tier set and some of the talents that you can choose to play in Mythic Plus content. A lot of passive healing capabilities from Prayer of Mending, which honestly doesn't require a lot of thought in terms of optimizing, which is great, especially for new players. A lot of spot healing capabilities depending on which build you're running, which again is really, really important when you're looking at Season 2 in terms of the healing patterns that are evident in Season 2. There is a lot of need for that spot healing. Again, in terms of utility, you don't have an Interrupt, which is a big deal in my opinion, but you do have PI, Power Infusion, you have Master Spell. Blizzard has tried to reduce the need for Master Spell, but honestly, if you're doing bursting weeks or if you're doing, again, certain dungeons, Master Spell is still very, very nice, and Mind Suit can still be, again, also Blizzard has been nerfing the need of Mind Suit, but it can still be used in a lot of keys to, again, prevent certain mistakes or people from pulling mobs that don't need to be pulled. So I genuinely believe that Holy Priest, and a lot of people tend to knock down Holy Priest damage, but you can provide a decent amount of damage, especially with things like Ethereal Blaze, because with Ethereal Blaze, you can apply Holy Fires, and then you can go back to healing. One of the biggest issues with Holy Priest in the past was that you would have to sacrifice almost all of your healing in order to provide additional damage, but right now in Dragonflight, they have gone through multiple different buffs in terms of providing or adding additional DPS components to Holy Priest, and I've seen decent numbers in terms of damage as Holy Priest when you're doing these weekly keys, but I know that can and will change in the highest keys in the world where you might have to focus more on healing, and that's where I've seen a huge drop off of Holy Priest when it comes to the highest keys in the world, but this is for weekly key ranking. And the last healer I'm going to be placing is going to be Discipline Priest. I'm going to be placing it in A tier. Big surprise, the differentiation or difference in terms of healers in A tier when it comes to weekly keys, there isn't very many differences. A lot of healers have advantages and disadvantages, and I think Holy Paladin is probably the only one that has distinct advantages when it comes to timing those keys. But Discipline Priest, I genuinely believe if you're a new player coming into World of Warcraft in terms of Dragonflight, you probably will have an easier time playing as Holy Priest because it is a lot more of that classic healing playstyle. You see people take damage, you heal them. With Discipline Priest, you'll have the DPS and you'll heal through your DPS. Now, you do have spot healing capabilities, you do have ways of preventing people from dying in terms of, hey, you have pain suppression, you can use Power of Life. Power of Life is available to all priest specs, but you might have to make use of that a little bit more as a Discipline Priest. So generally, I do think that Discipline Priest will require more thought, it will require more anticipation of damage in terms of dealing with this, but the fact that your tier set bonus gives you the ability of having instant cast powered radiances makes this spec, or it catapults this spec in terms of fun and in terms of dealing with those unexpected AoE damage or even spot healing capabilities sometimes in terms of casting your instant cast powered radiance. It feels powerful, it feels fun, but if you're god tier Discipline Priest who knows when to anticipate damage, who knows when to use their cooldowns and things like that, who knows how to use or really emphasize their spot healing or prevent people from dying in terms of shielding and things like that, you're going to have a good time. But I still think it's going to be relatively harder for you to play than something like your counterpart in terms of Holy Priest, but it's very fun because Discipline Priest is going to provide a lot of damage, it can provide a lot of healing when used correctly, and again, Priest in general is a great beginner's class. You can start off with Holy Priest and then you can master Discipline if you really want that. Again, reactive playstyle or proactive playstyle, which playstyle appeals more to you, you can discover that by just picking Priest and doing Mythic Plus content or even raiding if you really choose to. And this kind of concludes my ranking for those weekly type of keys if you're trying to get in or about that 20 Mythic Plus range. Again, I would say that pretty much all of the healers have some advantages and disadvantages when it comes to Mythic Plus, with an exception of something like Holy Paladin, who just feels like it's made for that Mythic Plus content. It just feels so much more powerful, or it feels like it has a cooldown for every single situation, and that's after being nerfed by a really substantial amount. I just think Holy Paladin is made for Mythic Plus, and every other healer has advantages, disadvantages in terms of utility, in terms of HPS, in terms of DPS, but you can make them, you can honestly make every single healer work and have a really good time in those weekly key ranges. But what about those really high keys if you're looking to get that rank 1 title or push keys and things like that? Honestly, my ranking for that would probably change a little bit. I would actually probably place most of the healers in something like a B tier. And I probably would place Discipline Priest in A tier because it receives substantial buffs in terms of its atonement healing. Again, you don't have an interrupt as a Discipline Priest, so you need to make sure that your party can handle interrupts. They can call. Again, if you're doing highest keys in the world, you're probably on Discord or voice chat, and you can really micromanage those kind of things. PI or Power Infusion can be very powerful in order to provide additional DPS or damage throughout the group. Again, it's not going to show up in damage meters. In terms of your overall damage to Discipline Priest, you can actually provide a good number. So your HPS or healing has been increased by, again, you can meet a lot of the healing checks. Master Spell is still important. Mind Suit is important, even though they have been nerfed quite a bit because Blizzard wants to step away from that priest utility. But I still think Discipline Priest at the highest keys in the world can achieve really good numbers. And again, it requires you to play really well. I was almost going to place Restoration Druid in the A tier because of the fact Grove Guardians have become a much more influential part of your healing profile as Resto Druid, and made Resto Druid, by using Grove Guardians, your DPS is going to increase because you're able to spend more time in different forms to provide more damage because the Grove Guardians are going to passively heal the party. But do I think all of the other healers are going to be like, hey, let's swap to Resto Druid and start pushing Mythic Plus? Absolutely not. Most people who are doing rank 1 titles are either Holy Paladins or Discipline Priest, and they're gonna stay playing Holy Paladin or Discipline Priest. But I do think Resto Druid's healing or playstyle has become a lot more fun, and I think you can have a really good time in higher keys. But that's something that, again, it's not going to change in terms of meta perceptions. People are still going to be looking for those Holy Paladins or possibly Discipline Priest. I was almost going to include Restoration Shaman in this key or this kind of ranking because I think the P wave build in terms of Primordial Wave, in terms of Ancestral Awakening, that's a Primal Tide Core, that build that uses very little mana consumption and can provide a good amount of healing is relatively fun. But you need to know how to play this because most of your healing is going to be coming from things like using your Primordial Wave properly, using or building that healing into Cloudburst, and if you mess up your Cloudburst, it can be somewhat awkward. So I'm probably very reluctant about placing Resto Shaman here. Again, Mistweaver Monk, I still think it suffers from the fact that you need to be in melee range most of the time to provide healing, and it can be relatively awkward, and it doesn't have that Bloodlust or Battle Res capabilities. So that's another thing that is relatively powerful or relatively awkward for Mistweaver Monk. In terms of Preservation of Evoker, it's not an augmentation of Evoker when it comes to the highest keys in the world, and it just falls. Purely because it's not an augmentation of Evoker, and a lot of people don't want to stack the utility of classes, and therefore a Preservation is falling and Devastation has fallen. Even though Preservation and Devastation are both good healing and DPS specs, which is just wild. And Holy Priest, I probably would have to lower it a little bit down because purely looking at the highest key representation when it comes to 25 and up keys where the healing requirements are a lot higher and things like that, I've just seen a huge drop off of Holy Priest when it comes to really high keys. Even though in my opinion I think you'd have a really good time as Holy Priest, I have to look at the data or statistical information that's available there, again, when looking at really high keys. But again, this is for the highest keys in the world. Resto Druid could actually be brought down. I'm just high on Copium because of the changes to Grove Guardian, so I'm going to include them here just because of the changes. They're very impactful and things like that. I think Mistweaver Monk is extremely undervalued in high keys and Mythic Plus, but again, I talked about the fact that you have to be in melee and you're lacking some of that utility. Preservation of Evoker, there is nothing wrong with Preservation of Evoker outside of the fact that it's not augmentation, which is just, it's just kind of wild. Again, you can really mix and match these if you really want to, but I don't want people to dwell or focus on this ranking when it comes to high keys, because let's be honest, most people in the world right now who are playing World of Warcraft, they're just looking to get those weekly keys done, and they're looking to do it in a relatively easy manner. And in terms of raiding, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know a lot of people right now are not focusing on raiding too much, or they're taking breaks and things like that, but they're looking to play a healer that's going to provide, for example, maybe the most HPS. And this is the graph for Aberrus in terms of Mythic, in terms of looking at healers and HPS. HPS is not a defining factor of what makes a healer really strong. For example, Resto Druid having the highest HPS does not make it the best healer. You would still want someone like a Holy Paladin in terms of adding additional spot healing capabilities or additional tank healing capabilities if you're approaching a fight where there's a lot of tank damage. For example, damage reduction cooldowns are not being shown on this graph. For another example, Holy Priest being second last in terms of HPS doesn't mean that they're bad, because Holy Priest is actually one of the best healers when it comes to raiding meta, when it comes to race to world first and things like that, because Discipline Priest, or sorry, Holy Priest, Symbol of Hope, is absolutely insane if you can line up and provide additional use of defensive cooldowns for the raid when you need them, or for example, you're providing PI, or for example, you're providing Mass Dispel. And again, that's the kind of mentality you should have when you're looking at these charts in terms of pure HPS. Pure HPS does not mean these healers are going to be good and things like that. Discipline Priest has climbed insanely high because of the changes in terms of atonement, things like that, additional atonement transfer, and again, Luminous Barrier is going to climb them in pure HPS. Are you going to be using Luminous Barrier when you can, or the whole party can stack and you want that 25% damage reduction from Powered Barrier? Again, that's up to you to decide. So HPS, not a defining factor, but if you're looking to play highest HPS healer, Resto Druid can do really, really well. But you have to keep in mind, Resto Druid is very susceptible to being sniped. So you need to make sure that you're using your convokes and flourishes in the right ways. If there is a lot of, how to say, simplification in terms of Resto Druid gameplay, because reforestation is not really a thing anymore. So you don't need to combine your Tree of Life proc from reforestation with convokes anymore, which means you can use your convokes, flourishes a lot more freely, which means that you probably can have an easier time as Resto Druid. But again, susceptible to being sniped, or depending on how many healers you bring. If you're bringing 5 healers in a mythic raid content, your Resto Druid is going to have a hard time in terms of getting good HPS logs. But the biggest winner in terms of raiding, in my opinion, is going to be Mistweaver Monk, and that is purely to do with the fact that your mana T got changed, which means that you have a pretty much a guaranteed tier set or 4 set proc when you use your mana T every 10 seconds, and you can have a higher uptime of your 4 set, especially if you're running the new and reworked Life Cycles talent, which means, again, Mistweavers are running that Clouded Focus Yulon 1 minute ramp build, which you can include your mana T in that ramp build to provide additional healing, which saw Mistweavers almost climbing to that highest HPS healer. You can almost say Mistweaver is the highest HPS healer, which is, it's been a long time since I was able to say that, and I think a lot of Mistweaver monks are probably enjoying this fact. Again, there are big disadvantages to playing that 1 minute Yulon ramp, because you're ramping up with Yulon and things like that, you're ramping up with your Enveloping Mist. If you have to move during that time, it can be extremely painful. And again, you're still a melee healer because you have to go and use your Rising Sun Kick to extend your hots and things like that during the ramp. So you're a melee healer, but you're also hard casting a lot. Let me know how I feel about this. Again, I should have covered Resto Druid Grove Guardian change has, how do I say, it's not as impactful it is in raids as it is in Mythic Plus. Grove Guardians are not going to account for a huge amount of your total healing. If you look at Mythic Plus, it can account for upwards of 30% of your overall healing. In raiding, that's not going to be the case. So I genuinely believe the Grove Guardian change was more important, or was more aimed at that Mythic Plus content, because they wanted to allow Resto Druids to deal or heal when they're not prepared. And again, that's something that I covered in Mythic Plus. In terms of other healers, you can see Preservation, Evoker. Again, this is 75 percentile in terms of Mythic rating, so this is something that you might achieve if you're playing a healers to a decent extent. Again, Preservation, Evoker does decent HPS, but if you look at what they lack in terms of the raid buff, is not really, again, Blessing of the Bronze is not something that you need an Evoker for, depending on which fight you're doing. Evokers still struggle from the range limitations and things like that. I still think a good Preservation Evoker can do really good HPS, but their overall, or how do you say, Evoker's DPS in raid is one of the lowest. You have range limitations. There's just, I just feel like Evoker, it needs something else. If you're looking at 10.2 and things like that, and if I'm looking at the utility that Evoker provides, the Preservation Evoker provides, I just feel like a lot of Preservation Evokers might just have to, or be forced to play Augmentation, because Augmentation is just so much better and things like that. I just think Preservation needs another, like, a factor for them to be brought in raids, because right now HPS is good, but are they going to be invited in Race to World first? I'm doing a little bit of predictions here for the next year. They need to have another big ability to make them more enticing to be invited. Again, this one Priest is getting, this is 10.17. I don't want to go and make predictions for 10.2. This one Priest healing has been increased a lot. Luminous Barrier has been added and things like that. If you wanna, if you can make use of Luminous Barrier, or if you want to use of make use of the damage reduction, it really depends on what you want. HPS logs, or again, if you're doing progression. Holy Paladin, again, Holy Paladin is the absolute god tier in Mythic Plus. In raiding, if you're looking to top HPS, Holy Paladin is not going to do that right now, because it's been nerfed by, like, probably overall close to 20% in terms of pure HPS. Do you still want the Holy Paladin in raids for that tank healing or spot healing or damage reduction in terms of Aura Master and Diva Aura? Yeah, I still think Holy Paladin has a spot in raid environments in 10.17, because it brings a lot to the party. A lot of passive damage. Again, the damage has been reduced, but still, passive damage, damage reduction, again, tank healing, which can be important depending on which boss you're doing. So I still think Holy Paladin is a decent spot. It's not a HPS king. Holy Priest I mentioned, they still provide a lot of utility with Symbol of Hope, with PI. Again, PI is something that the Discipline Priest can provide. Master Spell is something that Discipline Priest can provide. But historically, again, at the start of Aberrus, in terms of the Race to World First, Holy Priest was actually one of the preferred healers because he was able to heal a lot. He had Symbol of Hope, and it just would be a very solid healer in terms of providing additional damage to PI, in terms of PIing other DPS classes, Master Spell, and just doing a solid overall healing. In 10.17, a lot of other classes caught up, but I still think Holy Priest is a very solid choice. Again, it's a lot easier to play something like a Holy Priest than it is Discipline Priest. Discipline Priest Evangelism rotation in raids is absolutely insane in terms of how many buttons and how many, again, the order of buttons you have to press. It's wild. And in terms of Rest of Shamans, in terms of pure HPS, it might be a little bit lower than everyone else, but again, the difference is not that big. And I think the Rest of Shamans went through a roller coaster of emotion when it comes to, again, the tier set was really underwhelming for a really long time. Blizzard buffed them multiple times in terms of the tier set, in terms of there's just been a lot of changes to Resto Shaman. Resto Shamans have been experimenting with different builds in terms of the Chain Heal, in terms of the Primordial Wave build, and you still provide a decent amount of utility as Resto Shaman in raid. Spirit Link Totem can be situationally very strong. For example, if you're doing Sacred Phase 1, the very end of Phase 1, Spirit Link is an absolute MVP. It can be really, really, really good in those situations. Having or using things like Ancestral Protection Totem can also be really good. That's going to lower your overall healing because you don't have Earthen Wall Totem, which is a good absorb. But if you use APT at the right times, it can be a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver during progression. In the same way that the Ancestral Vigor talent was used by some of the Resto Shams during progression, which again, it's not going to show up on the HPS meters, but it provides additional survivability. So I still think you can have really good or decent utility as Resto Shaman and be a big or core part of your raiding team, but you might have to sacrifice HPS, or if you're looking to pop HPS, Resto Shaman is most likely not going to be the main choice. And this concludes my video, and this was insanely long, and I did want to go out with a bang in terms of talking about all the healers in 10.17 because everything or a lot of things are going to change in 10.2. This is one of the last videos that I do in terms of this patch, and I wanted to talk about all healers, the positives, the negatives in terms of rating, in terms of Mythic Plus. Again, we ranked weekly keys for the first time ever because I genuinely believe most people are aiming for that plus 20 keys and they want to have a healer that, I wanted to give you a representation that all of the healers can achieve plus 20 keys. And actually the difference between most healers in terms of having a good time in that weekly key range is negligible, with the exception of something like Holy Paladin, who is just honestly made for Mythic Plus at this given point. It just fits those damage and healing patterns really, really, really well. But if you're playing a Resto Shaman for that weekly key, or if you're playing Discipline Priest or Mistweaver Monk, you can master your class and have a really good time. When it comes to those highest keys in the world, the meta is going to kind of revolve around your group composition and things like that. You have, again, the God comp has been really, really prevalent, but it has been nerfed substantially. But most people right now are already pushing or so used to with that God comp, and they probably achieved rank 1s and things like that, and they're just gonna keep playing Holy Paladin, for example. But I think certain healers like Resto Druid in 10.17 received some substantial changes in terms of Grove Guardian, in terms of Mythic Plus. It's not going to be groundbreaking in terms of, hey, I'm playing Holy Paladin, I'm gonna swap to Resto Druid. Absolutely not. But if you're playing Resto Druid in Mythic Plus primarily, I'm willing to bet that you're relatively happy with Grove Guardians. And again, Mistweaver Monk mana tea changes, honestly, I think they're a bit more influential in something like Raid Environment, where you can apply or combine your mana tea and proc your tier set bonus and combine that during your Yulon ramp with Clouded Focus and just see those numbers go up and things like that. And I think it's interesting. In terms of summary for the whole patch, again, I genuinely believe that the rework for Holy Paladin made them pretty much, again, the kings of Mythic Plus. They might not be the kings in terms of rating, in terms of the HPS and things like that, but they're so suited for Mythic Plus. There's some substantial changes happening in 10.2, and I think a lot of things are going to be changed in terms of what are the best healers for Mythic Plus, what are the best healers for raids and things like that. And I'm going to be testing that from now on. Basically, most of my videos are going to be about 10.2. Guys, let me know how you feel about 10.17. Let me know how you feel about this video. And if you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in 10.2.